Hey there, folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Interviews. I'm Arlyeon.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Wayne.
Yeah, actually, thank you. He, if you somehow don't know, is an extremely talented voice actor whom you may know as the Ancestor from Darkest Dungeon, though his body of works is hardly limited to that, given his vocal talents have lent themselves to especially ominous audiobook readings of H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu, The Shadow over Innsmouth, and other titles, as well as Poe's The Raven and Morella. There's also his more contemporary readings as well as his musical talents. Speaking of, you've been working in music for a long time, so I'm a bit curious about what music you listen to while you're not making it, Wayne. Like, what are your top three favorite songs?
Yeah, that's really hard. You'd probably get a better answer saying, what are my top three favorite decades? Because I listen to everything, really. But if I had to pin it down, it changes like every hour, too. What have I been listening to? Um, an album from 1971, Who's Next, uh, by The Who. uh, Song called Behind Blue Eyes. You familiar with that, or am I just dating myself?
That actually does stand out to me, which might also be dating myself, but I
Okay.
also, yeah.
I never heard of it.
And I have a couple of weird ones too that I've been listening to lately. A band I discovered in I think 1971 or 72. Um, the name of the band is Captain Beyond, and for the time they were one of the first real prog rock, progressive rock bands where they were, breaking your normal musical forms of the time. They're playing in odd time signatures and things like that, and they had very esoteric lyrics. And the song I like is the first one on side one of their first album. The album's also called Captain Beyond, and the song is called "Dancing Madly Backwards on a Sea of Air." And you have to look it up. If you've never heard it, you have to look it up on I don't know, YouTube or iTunes or something, because if you like aggressive guitar and really cool drums. The drummer is my favorite drummer ever. His name's Bobby Caldwell, by the way. And Dancing Madly Backwards on a Sea of Air, Captain Beyond. And last but not least, I'd have to say, you ever heard of a band called the Mahavishnu Orchestra?
No.
Okay. Well, they were like at the very beginning of jazz rock fusion. They had a guitar player named John McLaughlin, English guy, who was like the most uh, studied, adept, aggressive, intellectual guitar player you ever heard in your life. And he played Gibson double neck SG. One of the necks was a 12 string, and the other neck was a 6 string through like Marshall amps cranked to the max. It was like, I don't know. It was like Jimi Hendrix meets Albert Einstein. He was just such an intellectual and athletic player. And the drummer was the same. They both had a history of playing with Miles Davis. You heard that name? Jazz guy.
Sounds familiar, actually,
Yeah.
but very
He was
technical.
a big jazz guy, and in the '70s he came out with an album called Bitches Brew, which was actually uh, it's lauded as being the first jazz rock fusion album or piece of music. And both of these guys were on it. And the drummer I'm talking about, his name is Billy Cobham, Cobham, and oh my God, what a drummer! What a drummer! I'm a drummer myself, so drummers impress me when they get past a certain level. And this guy he's just somewhere out beyond the far reaches of the universe in terms of what he can do. He's ambidextrous, and I've seen him in concert a number of times. He has double bass drums, and he's just uh, playing with all the energy and abandon and volume of a super rock player, but at the same time, he's got all the chops and finesse and intellect of a jazz player. So that combination is just outstanding. Uh, anyway, the song is called "Vital Transformation," and you should look it up. I should give you some links before the end of this, so people
Oh
have
yeah.
people have a chance to look these up, because they're definitely worth hearing. If you're an aggressive music fan, any one of these three or all three of them will definitely make your day. Mahavishnu Orchestra, the album's Inner Mounting Flame from 1971, I think, and the song is Vital Transformation. It's in a time signature of, I think, 12/9 or something, something weird, like just outer space time signature. If you're trying to clap your hands or dance to it or something, you probably just have a stroke.
That, I mean, God, that just makes me think of Dragon Force for a moment. Ah,
That's the kind of stuff that interests me music wise. Is I can listen to and love just about any kind of music, as long as it meets certain criteria, and that criteria would be creativity and ability, plus emotional content. If the player is really expressing something that grabs you, then I can listen to rock or R&B or soul or jazz or classical, for that matter. It doesn't matter, as long as it's as long as it's got something to recommend it. I mean, if it's just somebody who has a nodding acquaintance with a musical instrument, then that doesn't really float my boat.
altogether fair. And yeah, we're definitely going to be open to accepting links to pass on so people can actually tune into this. Uh,
Yeah, check them out.
to transition from music, though, and more to something else thematic, normally at the start is where I sort of ask people what their favorite game is. But when we were initially chatting back and forth to set up the interview, you'd mentioned that Darkest Dungeon was more or less your introduction to the gaming community as it currently is.
Yeah.
Since being introduced, have you started to dabble in gaming?
Well, I've been getting more of an interest in it. Just as give you an idea of my background, as far as video games go, uh, I was there when they were born. Pong and Space Invaders and Pac-Man. I used to play them in bars for a quarter a play, and I didn't really get captured by video games, so I didn't really follow the whole evolution of them. And when I got hooked up with Red Hook Studios and doing Darkest Dungeon, of course, started to develop an interest in it and try and find out the background of it. And God, just to find out how many people are focused on it and know so much about it and have such a background in it. And the level that it's reached, and the level of talent that developers have who are creating these things, it's just like a whole new world for me. So I've been sort of exposing myself more to it just through the friends I've made through uh, Twitter and Twitch, and the gaming community, so to speak. And I've been watching a lot of these people stream on Twitch, primarily Darkest Dungeon. I just get a kick out of the way. It drives some people crazy, because it's really clever the way that the authors wrote into it, the whole stress factor and the insanity factor, and how some of your players can just lose their minds and start doing things that are detrimental to you winning the game, and they're your heroes and they're supposed to be on your side. It's crazy. So yeah, I've been watching a lot of people stream, and so I'm getting more of an introduction to the whole gaming phenomenon.
So, are your current interests lying more as a spectator, or is there anything that you're interested in actually playing as I suppose, the player?
I haven't really gotten into playing much. I've done a couple of like first-person shooter things over the course of time, but I couldn't even, I've had such a lack of focus on it. I couldn't even tell you what game that I was playing.
So, no hopes of us feeding you to Darkest Dungeon and watching for Schadenfreude reasons and catharsis?
Absolutely. But I don't know. I may try playing Darkest Dungeon sometime if I think I can stand the stress level.
All I ask is you send me links on my Twitter so I can share it.
Oh,
I would
absolutely.
totally share that. Just because then it would be like you riffing on your narrator self.
It'd be like a really schizophrenic experience. I'd be arguing with the ancestor. The player would be yelling at the ancestor to leave me alone, you bastard.
People watching wouldn't even know who's talking. It's like, is he saying that or is that in the game?
Oh yeah, because he could like totally quote off the lines too, which would make it even better.
It'd be awesome. So anyway, we actually got a ton of community questions. So I was kind of here to read off some of those. So to start off, Apex Predator wants to know, what is it like to hear yourself in Darkest Dungeon now that you get to see it with all the visuals and effects that go along with it? 'Cause I mean, you mentioned that you said Red Hook kind of introduced you, like reintroduced you to the whole gaming thing. So it must be a little weird to see yourself in one.
Yeah, it's cool. It's amazing to me um, to see it in in its full blown operation. There's so much in it to appreciate that. When I was recording the lines, I recorded my home studio with the script will be there, and of course there's no effects on the voice. There's no music. There's no sound effects. There's no visuals, and to see it with the art and the sound design and the score and the animation and just everything put together. It's like wow, it's hard to describe, but it's like almost not. You didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect. And to see it in its full blown form is great. The co-founders of Red Hook Studio, Chris Barassa and Tyler Sigmund, are the geniuses behind it. They came up with the idea and the concept, and Chris wrote the script, which is just incredible. And he's also the main artist. So these are multi-talented people. They've got another artist working on it as well, named Trudy Castle. The score was done by composer and musician Stuart Chatwood.
Yeah.
Company called Power Up Audio out of Canada. Jeff Tanksock and Kevin Regamy. They did the sound design on it. So they took my dry files, put the effects on them and EQ'd them and just made them powerful and did all their magic to it. A guy named Brooks Gordon was the main animator, and a fellow named Keir Miron was the programmer. And just as it's like, I don't know, it's like, to use a sports analogy, it's like joining the New York Yankees or something. To be on a team that's that talented and that incredible.
Yeah, I mean, all those amazing people come together and just make something even more amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
I have never once regretted backing Darkest Dungeon. Because I was there from like the start, where they had like the Warren, the Weald, and god damn it, not the Courtyard. God damn it, where all the skeletons are. But like where it just had like the first 3 areas was like back when I remember how much the game has come from there, and it's been so neat seeing the evolution of everything, seeing all the story flesh out, and like more and more of what you added to it, Baras's artwork, the background comics for all the characters, which is like this neat touch that you never see in the game proper, but it's there supporting the game and totally just accessible.
Yeah.
But on this subject for the whole thing being brought together and also just sort of tied to you as a spectator as so far, Bringer of Ledges asks, what is your favorite boss and class in Darkest Dungeon?
Okay. I kind of think I think the Shambler is really cool. Familiar with that guy?
The fucking Shoggoth?
Yeah,
The
he's
Shoggoth? Yeah.
very very Lovecraftian. He's all tentacles and eyeballs, and he's a real pain in the ass too because you know he'll show up totally out of the blue as a surprise, and if you run away from him, you can't get away because next time you go back, he'll be in the next fight. You know, so it's a that's I guess part of where the psychological stress comes in because not only is like in that guy's instance, not only is he you know cool looking character and a cool monster and all that, but you can't get away from him. And
Summoning him by accident with a torch.
there's you know there's the shuffling horror, and later on the drowned crew.
Mm.
Chris's artwork is just astounding. I don't know. I can't design. The artwork is so cool. Anytime I'm looking at one of them, that's the one that'll be my favorite. The Plague Doctor, who she throws plague-filled grenades.
Blight everywhere.
What I like about that.
Yeah, she's, I think, how I like beat the ever-living tar out of Crimson Court was just like blighting everything. So they're like, oh, we have 4 turns. And I'm like, that is fine. You keep taking as many turns as you like.
Yeah.
I personally have always been fond of the Collector, partly because of like the King in Yellow overtones or undertones. Carcosa. I think that's actually where I put as like my home location on Twitch. I might need to check.
So, a bit of a turn from the Darkest Dungeon questions. What actually got you into voice acting?
Well, I had my own home studio like forever. I started out many moons ago with a little unit called the Porta Studio by Tascam, and what it was it was like a 4-channel mixer built in with a tape deck that had actually recorded on cassette. You would put in a stereo cassette and you could get 4 tracks out of it because out of the left and right stereo tracks on side 1 and left and right stereo tracks on side 2, they lined them up with the recorded playback heads so that it gave you 4 different tracks all on one side, you know, going in one direction. So you could overdub and do sound on sound and all that kind of stuff. So
And talk about something that like if our younger audience members are not gonna have any idea about.
Yeah, it was definitely cool stuff, and I had a little tape delay thing called a Space Echo, which actually a company named Roland made it, and it of course considered vintage now. It had it was like a tape recorder thing, only it recorded in loops. So the playback head of the tape was in one position, and the record head was separated from that. So what it would do is record whatever you said into it, and then play it back at whatever interval you wanted to. So you could play it back almost instantly. So it got that slap back type of sound, or you could move this dial, which would put the heads further apart, and you'd say hello, and you could get it to go hello, 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 and so I had that as an effect, and yeah, it was really dinosaur stuff, but that evolved over the years and ended up with some, you know, fairly serious recording gear. Then when I started to think about trying to get off the road in terms of music and stop all the traveling, what could I do? What kind of job could I do where I wouldn't have to get out of my bathrobe, you know? And so that was kind of the impetus behind it. I had the equipment, I knew how to use it, and I really had an interest in doing something else creative that wouldn't involve a lot of traveling and time on the road. I'd been interested in spoken word recordings. I think it was 1975. I went to the library and I found a recording of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein by a full cast on an LP, on a record, on vinyl.
Huh.
And that was my first exposure to anything that might be called an audiobook. And so over the course of the next I don't know 10, 20 years after that, I got the audiobook industry was growing. There was more and more of it. So I would see you can get an audio cassette of this, that, or the other horror author or horror story or whatever, and I would actually pop them in the cassette player in the car. So when I was traveling, if I had an 8-hour drive, I'd have an audiobook to listen to. It was really cool. So it just got me around, I don't know, 1998 or 1999. It's like, hey, I got all this equipment. I think I could probably do that. I've got enough of a background in hearing this stuff that I have a basic idea of what it's about. And I just started researching it. I ended up taking acting lessons. I ended up taking seminars and courses that were specific to voiceover and specific to narration, and all along the way, learning more about the gear and acquiring the home studio necessary to do it. And basically, that was it. It started to take off around I don't know 2005 or so, and by 2007, I was pretty well up and running, getting a lot of work. I was doing all sorts of different things. I was doing commercials for radio and commercials for TV, and I volunteered at a studio in New Haven, Connecticut, which is local to me, that did recordings for the blind and dyslexic. So I read just about everything. You'd go in for a shift and they'd give you a script like, here, we want you to record this today. It might be a newspaper. It might be a play. It might be a textbook. It might be a novel. It might be a magazine. Once I read an owner's manual for a microwave oven. So I really literally read everything, and it's only been recently, really, relatively recently anyway, the past few years, I've really started to weed some of that activity out and got basically into a more audiobook mode, and kind of focusing on the horror and weird fiction stuff. That's where I seem to be going. That's what comes naturally to me. So being weird and creepy is natural to me. So I don't know what the hell that says about me, but
I think he actually answered my next question, so I think it's back to you, Shrimp.
All right. Well, in that case, cutest girl here asks, what sort of warm-up exercises do you do before getting into recording?
sometimes I'll do like tongue twisters. That's not all that much fun though. It's kind of a pain. But normally when I'll get up in the morning or afternoon, whatever the case may be, and if I grab something to read, if it's a magazine or a book or a newspaper, I'll read that out loud, just like sort of warm up that way. Like I said, the tongue twisters are probably a good idea. They loosen you up and stop you from stumbling all over yourself. But
do you have any like go-to tongue twisters that you usually?
Thank you, Shrimp.
Yeah, they're hard, man. They're hard, and they're not fun. So what I usually do is, I'm working 100% my own studio now, so it's not as if I'm torturing anybody else with this at the time. But I'll just stumble through, the first 20 minutes of a session and get tongue tied and swear and and erase that and then re-record it. And next time I stumble, I have to bleep myself out. Beep beep beep. Sure. But eventually, eventually I'll be loosened up enough to be able to go without without making mistakes. And so the answer to that question, nothing really specific other than just getting the vocal cords moving and getting the tongue moving and getting words in your mouth and warming up that way. So no specific places.
Okay, I don't think we're gonna put you on the spot here and like send you like 8 tongue twisters to read off.
Oh no, I can't do it. I can't do them. I mean, I'm no better than anybody else at them. I've seen people over the course of some of the things I've studied. Matter of fact, I forget the actor's name, but there was an actor who did a commercial back in the '80s, I think it was, and like that was his thing. He was the fastest speaker on the planet Earth, and he would never make a mistake. And I forget what the ad was for, but he would just be like.
Yeah, I've seen stuff for him, and they slowed down the recording.
You didn't miss a word, It's like, oh, God.
Yeah, they actually recorded that and slowed it down to see if he was accurately saying everything, and he accurately says everything at this absolutely breakneck pace, and it's...
Oh, the guy I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's a recording of it on YouTube, actually.
Well, I'll have to look that up. I mean, that's a skill. I mean, there's only one place to use it, I guess, but
auction houses.
Yeah.
Also, I guess every single time they have really shady safety warnings on like consuming medication or chips. Yeah, there was a bag of chips that had like the shadiest warning message on the back, and I didn't even notice because it was in super tiny print until someone pointed it out, and I never ate that brand of chips again.
Yep.
Yep.
It cause extreme death. Ask your doctor before eating.
The voice business, they call that the weasel part of the script, because you're required by law to say what this medication will do to you, if may do to you. You're required by law to say it, but you don't really want anybody to hear it. So, so they just your heart may explode and your lungs may fall out. They say it so fast you don't get it.
That's what the fine print is for, and recording it and reading it later.
Yep.
God damn. But, so another community question here. Zomnia wants to know, how many voices do you have in your repertoire? And on top of that, Cream Salmon, God, I love reading like community questions just for the names people have, wants to know if you have a favorite voice in your repertoire.
Okay. I don't know, it's weird. I don't really think of it that way, where I have a specific set of voices. Just for any given script or audiobook manuscript, I try and follow the direction that you find in the script. That's one of the skills you have to develop to be in this business. I mean, you just can't look at the page and spit out the words and you're done. That's your job. You have to take into account what the author is trying to do, what their purpose is, what they're trying to say, and how can you best express that. So I find things within the script itself, and you'll find that kind of stuff all over. Like if you're in a book, it's like blah 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 blah, he said angrily. So okay, that's a pretty explicit direction. If I'm going to read that out loud, I have to read it angrily, quietly, or with a smirk or whatever. So you go for the character personality, like the attitudes that character has, the emotional construction of the character. How would a person that has these personality attributes, how would they react in this particular situation? If they stub their toe, how angry would they get? I mean, it's down to little micromanaging the personality of whatever you're voicing, try and get it right. So if I have to do a character, I just try and analyze the character and analyze what the author meant to say and try and serve it that way. So I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to do that. Some of them are specified in terms of like a regional accent or a dialect. There's plenty of places online where you can get a head start on that stuff. If a guy has a Northern England accent, I don't have that character in my repertoire per se, and off the top of my head. But if I spend 20 minutes online with, listening to a person with that accent speak, I can approximate it. And since I have a lot of time in my own home studio, I'm not in pressure to get a session done. Oh, this has to be done by 1:30 this afternoon. I can take time with it and develop a character. So don't really have a repertoire per se, or a specific set of voices.
Interesting. It's like sometimes a lot more goes into things than you originally think.
Oh man, absolutely. When I first started this, I was like, I went to there was a studio in New York that it had a introduction to voiceover type of thing, and they kind of turned me on to the fact that there's a million different categories to voiceover. There's voices everywhere. From a supermarket where you hear the person say, peas are on sale in aisle 4, whatever, to uh, any number of voices that you hear that are actually being paid to do that, and there are billions of different categories. There's corporate narration. There's audiobooks that are fiction. There's audiobooks that are nonfiction. Trying to think of some of the other things I've done. There's a billion different categories, and I wanted to do them, and the guy just kind of like smiled and said, "Yeah, okay, you'll learn." But what you got to do is go with your strengths as you find out what these categories are, and God, there's just so much to learn. There's a concept called prosody in reading, prosody, and what that means is the different intonations and different little techniques that you use to deliver the proper meaning. Like just an example, if you have a sentence with X number of words in it, I thought you ate the pork chop. That's one. That's 7 words. I can give you 7 different meanings for that sentence. 7 totally. I thought you ate the pork chop. This other person didn't think that. I thought that. I thought you ate the pork chop. I didn't know it. I thought you did. I thought you ate the pork chop. Not this guy over here. I thought you did. I thought you ate the chop, that specific one. I thought you ate the pork chop, not the lamb chop. I thought you ate the pork chop. I thought you ate the pork chop, not the pork roast. 7 different meanings, same 7 words, same order, everything. And prosody will also give you techniques about using attitude, or like the emotional state of if I said to you, "Yeah, that was a great movie," I can say it as if I really mean it, or I can say it the same exact sentence as if it's the exact opposite thing. "Yeah, that was a great movie." "Yeah, that was a great movie." You know what I mean? Same words, same order, but how you say it changes the meaning. So you use all those things in character development, and after a while it comes second nature. It was overwhelming There's just so much to learn. But a lot of it becomes second nature and just becomes reflexive so that you do it without thinking of it. If you look at the sentence, you read ahead, uh, you're looking at the end of the paragraph by the time the words of the first sentence or two are coming out of your mouth. So you know where you're going, you know what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And it all just becomes natural, but it's stuff that you absolutely have to be aware of, have to learn about.
Since you've already touched on a lot of the skills you've had to develop and pick up, but is there any other notable ones that we've not touched on then?
Well, I mean, as many ways as you can say something, uh, you can change it just by the pitch of your voice. The tone of your voice holds the emotional coloration. You can use dramatic pauses, right? Uh, you could say
Pause
things
for emphasis. Thank you,
project,
Kirk.
or you can speak them softly. Sometimes you would think if you want to emphasize something, you get somebody's attention. You think you have to yell it. You think you better bring your voice up. Sometimes it can be just as attention grabbing if you're whispering. If you're whispering about if there's a line in a scene in a book where the uh, the villain is threatening to kill someone, sometimes it could be more chilling and scary. Just, I'm gonna rip your heart out. You just whisper it, and that can be creepier than all the anger and screaming in the world. If you there's a lot of choices to make. You make thousands of choices in any given script. You want the person at the other end to feel what the author wanted them to feel, whether it's fear or anger or love or happiness or humor. And it's acting. It's like any other kind of acting. It's like movie acting, except you've got to get that across to the person, to the audience, without them seeing you. You got to get them to hear a smile, or to hear I don't know, hear a shrug, or hear a frown, or if the character is saying something snarky, you want to have them hear that lift of an eyebrow, you know, just that raised eyebrow. How do you make how do you speak to get that picture into a person's mind? Well, you can do it if it's just a matter of discovering how.
Awesome, and I'm glad we got to even get like the terminology, like the deep
Like prosody?
voice acting term. Yeah,
Yeah, and that was intimidating, like I said at first. But you don't think about all the technical aspects of it. Once you got them under your belt, once you have the skill, then uh, you're concentrating on trying to get it done and do your best job, do your best work, and do it right. And it's not as if there's going to be a written test at the end of the script, and you go, "Well, what use of prosody was that?" You know, you just have to be aware of it going into it.
yeah. Well, this next one's from Slarg232. He wants to know if prior to Red Hook, have you been contacted by or contacted anyone in the video game industry for voice work?
Yeah, I had a couple of things come by. Some things I'd auditioned for, but it's a real cattle call out there. If at that point I hadn't had any experience with that aspect of the industry, so I was just shooting in the dark. And I do an audition and not necessarily get it. I did some sessions that I was paid for, but the product never made it to market. So yeah. But Red Hook and Darkest Dungeon was my first real baptism by fire. It really plunged me into it.
How did you end up meeting the folks at Red Hook?
Well, I'd had a series of H.P. Lovecraft books that I recorded. I recorded 6 volumes of all different H.P. Lovecraft stories, and Chris Barassa had heard them. He actually wrote me. It was like, I don't know, 1990, I think. No, it was later than that. Must have been 99 or 2000, or around that time period. He wrote to me and basically thanking me for doing H.P. Lovecraft. He loved it. He was a big Lovecraft fan, and it's great to hear, great to hear my rendition of it. Well, thanks a lot. Here we go. 15 years later, he and Tyler are putting together the concept for Darkest Dungeon, and they wanted to make it Lovecraftian, and they wanted to do a trailer, video trailer for their Kickstarter, and so they're like, we should get some narration into it. Where could we go to get a narrator to do this stuff? And remember that guy Wayne June? We should get somebody that sounds like him to do that. Why don't we get him? So they contacted me, and I was like, wow! I saw some of the rushes for the art and storyboards, and I saw a basic outline. They told me about the concept, and I was like, oh yeah, man, yeah. And they were just like, yeah, give it your Lovecraft treatment. So I did that, and from that point on, it just built, and they wanted to use more, and they started writing more stuff, and luckily for me, it became a good part of the game, a big part of the game. So basically, that was it. They were familiar with my Lovecraft stuff. They were inventing a Lovecraft thing, and they thought I'd be appropriate for it, and so they cast me for it.
I'm extremely glad. We wouldn't have any of these local man ruins everything memes for Darkest Dungeon without the Ancestor playing such a prominent role.
I'm glad too, because it's a great privilege, like I said before, just to be on that kind of a team.
What was it like to work alongside all of them on Darkest Dungeon?
Well, my whole experience of it was I would get a script, usually a spreadsheet through Google Docs that would, have a series of lines on it, a series of sentences or paragraphs, and I would record that in my home studio, and then just send them the raw files. I would master them to the point where it was like, okay, there's no noise, there's no mistakes, there's no stomach grumbles. So I would just send them a raw, clean file, and they would take it from there. So I was kind of working alone. My experience of working with them was when I actually saw the finished product. It's like, wow, I'm a piece of this. It's great. But they gave me a lot of leeway and a lot of freedom. There wasn't a lot of direction going on. I would give them several takes of any given line, and so they would have choices at that point. And basically, that's what it was like.
I'm just trying to keep my cat under control because she's like trying to get up to the microphone.
Yeah, okay. I mentioned to you before, I've had that same problem. Just talking to a guy who had just written to me about, I checked out this audiobook of yours, really liked it, what a great story, and the whole thing. And I said, oh, wow, good, I'm glad you liked it. And he was like, there's a cat in chapter 9. Like, what? So evidently he was listening to the audiobook, and that had gotten by me in my quality control. So it's here's me holding forth, 7 years ago, blah 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 blah. Shit. But so that's still out there. If you can identify what book it was, contact me and I'll give you a prize. I'll give you a free download or something.
Sweet. The hunt is on.
I think the real tragedy here is that the cat wasn't credited for his work.
It was just
Now,
reading along.
I was thinking about maybe getting in touch with the producer and I mean the rights owner, getting them to credit the cat. Chapter 9, the little bastard in the background.
Okay, so this next one is from Anonymity Illusion. I think anonymity is probably a one-word tongue twister, but I got through it okay. What inspired you? What inspiration did you pull on for the specific voice of the ancestor? Is it just your normal speaking voice with a flair, or is it a distinct voice you do?
Well, I knew it was based on Lovecraft stuff, and I'd had experience with Lovecraft stuff, and I loved Lovecraft. You know, he was like my favorite horror author, and I had my own, approach to his material, my own way of doing his stuff. So it might have been just a slight exaggeration of the approach I took to Lovecraft. The story itself it's like loosely based, or it takes its inspiration from a Lovecraft story called "The Rats in the Walls," which I had done. So I had an idea of the arc of the story, um, and I just tried to take that attitude. When I sat down at the mic, I tried to, be morbid and dark and hopeless, merciless, and uh, whatever the script said, I just tried to believe that. I tried. That was my reality for that. However, 2 hours, however whatever length of time I was working on it, I believed that I was that person, and I believed that I was in that situation, and I just tried to feel that emotion and express that emotion so that whoever heard it and listened to it, that's the feeling they would get. So that's that's where the ancestor came from.
Huh. Voidwing wants us to inquire, and you've touched on this a little bit so far, but how much input did you have in the creative process? And on that note, were any of the ancestors' lines sort of ad-libbed?
Um, Not really. Every every word in the script was scripted by Red Hook, and I assume Chris wrote the words because I think he was specifically the Lovecraft aficionado of the bunch, and so I didn't have anything to do with the writing of the script. And the script, by the way, is so flawless when it comes to embodying a Lovecraft type of cosmic horror and hopelessness that since I had previous experience with Lovecraft, I just found it pretty natural to fall into. So, did I ad lib any of the lines? No. However, that being said, they gave me complete freedom to express those lines in whatever way I, felt was appropriate. So, and I would try it different ways too. I would try and look at the context from the line or the preceding lines or the following lines. Try and get the concept because it wasn't as if I could get to the end of the book and read the whole story. It's pretty much a 2 or 3 page experience at a time. So try and figure out what the emotional content should be, and then do it. And maybe I'll do the same thing, but a little bit more over the top, and maybe I'll dial it back. And so I would give them 3 takes or 4 takes or 5 takes of any given line, so that they would have choices that they could look at in context, and whichever one fit their particular vision be the one that they would end up choosing and using. So I I ad libbed the attitudes, but I didn't ad lib.
Huh.
Interesting.
That would also
So
provide insight for one of the future questions.
yeah, so besides like the takes that were like changing the attitude and stuff of the line, this time the cutest girl here wants to know how many different takes did most of the lines take as far as like mistakes that you had to redo it.
Oh God, mistakes. I mistakes are my life, but luckily, uh, working in my own studio, I have time to correct them before nobody hears my mistakes except me. Um, and there were some days where I just wasn't in shape, and to get the end result the way I wanted, and I would have to do it a million times. There were some days that I felt like I was right on the money, and I'd do three or four differing takes, and that would be it. Other lines I had to work harder on, and generally what I try and do too, if the deadline allows for it, is to record something one day and do a little bit of editing on the fly, but do serious editing the next day or a couple of hours later with some time away from it in between. Come back with fresh ears, and then sort of auditioning it the next day. I'll listen to it the next after 24 hours off or 12 hours off, and see if it stands up to the test of time. And I would catch stuff that was like, man, I was asleep at the wheel on that one, so I'm doing that over. But yeah, some of the lines took a lot, and some of them were easy, and I think that had as much to do with my own mental state as it did with any particular meaning or any particular vocabulary in any given line.
Okay, well, it's good to know that even the best make mistakes, because with the few scripted videos that we've had here, I mean, that I've had,
Shh.
um,
I'm
there's been times.
flawless. Don't
Well,
you
not
dare
even
throw me under the bus.
well, not even Arlyeon's side, but I know on my side, there's been times where I've made so many mistakes. I was like, you know what? I don't even feel like editing 3 hours of me making mistakes. I think I'll just scrap this and start over.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's a crude there's a crude saying about polishing a turd. You don't want to be doing that. You got to know when it's time to say, okay, scrap that and do it over.
Yeah.
Which, on that whole subject, what does help to keep you in the mindset, both when you're reading line after line and also when you sometimes need to take that pause and get back to things?
Yeah. I don't know. It's
That was on behalf of Good Joke Mate. Gotta
okay.
give credit where it's due.
Uh, well, I don't know. I try and take the work very seriously. I try not to take myself seriously, and get all wrapped up into it, so where it's all about me, because it's not about me. It's about whoever's paying for the script uh, at that point, and then in the end, it's listening to it and why, and you want to be a proper servant of that. So um, I don't I don't find I don't find it hard to stay committed to it, or to stay focused on it. It's just it's my job, so I want to do my best work, and people are going to hear it, and that's going to be a reflection on me. So there are going to be people who don't like it, and that's fine. Everybody's got opinions, but for those people that do like it, I want to do the best job I can for them. So it's not hard to stay committed to it. Plus, I love the process. It's not a lot of work to me. It's fun, and it's like with any given new project, there's research I have to do, and there's stuff I have to learn, and I love that. I like that. So it keeps me motivated, keeps me committed. So it's not
Awesome.
like I have to force myself to do it. There are days, believe me, it's a job, and there are days when it's like the alarm goes off, and I don't feel like going to work, but I do it anyway, and fulfill responsibilities, and that's what it's about. It's about taking the work seriously, and trying to do your best, and that's the way I stay committed. That's what keeps me focused.
I'm glad you have like a a positive view on it because I don't know. I feel like if I was having to do this so much, I'd be like, well, those blind people don't like how I explain their microwave instructions. Then maybe they should read it themselves.
Wow. Wow. Shrimp. This totally
Yeah.
explains why you quit the show to go and like farm the organs of hobos. God. Heartless.
But anyway, Trillion 5 wants to know which ancestor lines took the most takes. Like, was there one specifically that you remember having a hard time with and just hating?
I think at the very beginning, probably in the process of doing the first trailer, I was kind of feeling my way and trying to create the character and out of the just out of the script and what I knew of the concept, and so doing experimentation. And nah, I don't like the way I said that. I don't like the way this is working out. Nothing specific really, but just because of the fact that it wasn't established yet, I was still searching. I was searching at the beginning of it. So that's probably the hardest. The hardest part is making those decisions that you're going to be committed to 40 pages from now. Uh, well, I already made that decision and did it this way, so that's the way this line has to go. Now it has to go in context with that. I guess the answer to that is it's for me with this project. It wasn't a specific line as much as it was just getting the character development right.
Specific direction. If I'm understanding it correctly, just you sort of picking a specific direction for how you wanted to sort of characterize the
to taking what the script says, and at times it was even obvious, like okay, this has to get this idea across, and then the question is, okay, how do I accomplish that? What tone of voice do I use? What attitude do I use to 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 get that across? And there were certain times when it's like it might have been ambiguous. I can't think of a specific example, but uh, is okay. Is the ancestor's attitude here? Is he angry, or um, is he like sad, or is he gloating? Is he happy about it? But he's happy because somebody else is getting their butt kicked, or all of those things occurred in the script, but it might not have been absolutely uh, clear at any given point how that was going to work out. So I would do the line, like I said, several different ways. Do one that's angry, do one that's sad, do one that's gloating, do one that's like uh, crazy happy, and then before I commit to it and send it off, I'd listen to it back and go, no, okay, no, I can get rid of that one. That was definitely. But it's you try and uh, if something's ambiguous, if you're undecided, just try to hit all the possibilities, and let someone whose baby it is, let them make that choice, make the decision of which one to use.
I'm trying to think of Darkest Dungeon with like the voiceover just being crazy happy through all the lines.
That example, but
a great example. Great example. So the Rid Dragon, or the Rid Dragon, I think it's the Rid Dragon, asks, now that you're able to like listen to your lines in the game and see them in context, is there any specific line that you would want to see redone, or one that just didn't quite strike you as right? Or are you altogether satisfied with your lines, their delivery, and how they appear in the game?
Yeah, great question. No, I think anytime you're doing something that's creative, whether it's playing music or acting, or if you're painting or drawing or animating or whatever you're doing, there's going to be there's always going to be a measure of wanting a do over, for this. That wasn't my best work. I can do it better. I can do it better. But I had just a great advantage and this spills over into a lot of stuff that I do because I have my own studio, and I'm primarily uh, master of my own ship over here. I can do it over as many times as I want, and I'm not causing anybody any problems. I'm not causing the director any grief because I'm the director. I'm not uh, costing the project over much money because I'm taking all this studio time because it's my studio. And if it's my fault that I'm taking 2 hours to do a paragraph, then I don't pass the cost on to anyone else. That's my problem. So in one way, we touched on it before, where you got to know where to draw the line and stop doing things over, and realize that, okay, if I did this in a different way, it wouldn't necessarily be better. It would just be different. So I got this and I'm going to commit to it. And this is the way, I'm going to do it within those 3 to 5 take parameters. There's still a given wide choice. But you got to know when to quit polishing, and I don't know. It just like I said, I had the advantage and the good fortune to be able to do it as many times as I wanted to. So I did. So I don't think I ended up with anything that it was like, oh well, I wish I could do that over, because I kind of exhausted that. If there was something that was giving me problems, I did it. Had to do it over 100 times, I would do it over 100 times. So after that 100 times, you pretty much go, yeah, okay.
Fair.
I guess that's enough. So nothing made it out of here that I didn't finally decide that, yeah, okay, that's the best work I can do. So
Okay, so while you were only sending out the ones that you thought were the best you could do, Sheezoff wants to know, what was your favorite line in Darkest Dungeon?
well, wow, that's kind of like it's kind of like the music thing. Uh, the script is so great, it would be hard to pick just one that was my favorite. But there were some in there that were just particularly dark. Slowly, gently, this is how a life is taken.
Oh God, we actually have something topical for that, because Zanktor wants to know your opinion on overconfidence.
Oh, I'm all for it. I think everybody has to be overconfident, because it's certainly better than being underconfident. You got to be overconfident, but careful, and make sure you're right. But overconfidence is not. It's not. What was the line? It's a slow and insidious killer, something like that. I don't think it is. I think it's a necessary part of any creative process.
I don't think you could have crushed Zanktar more than you just did.
Just dodge the meme. Beautiful.
Oh, so next one is from Gibberingon, who wants to know.
One.
Oh, Gibbering one. Okay. They want to know, were there any hilarious or otherwise special moments when you were working on Darkest Dungeon, or any like anecdotes or anything?
Well, I knew enough to keep the cat upstairs, so he was out of the way. He wasn't a part of the Darkest Dungeon. As far as specific things in the studio, not really. I used to, actually, I still do torture my wife with it. Did you vacuum the living room like I said? Welcome home, such as it is. This squalid hamlet, these corrupted lands, they are yours now. I would torture her with lines from it, Did you do the dishes? In time, you will know the tragic extent of my failings. I hope that answers your question, madam. Oh, and but one thing did happen in the studio that I thought was pretty funny. It wasn't specifically the Darkest Dungeon, but I was working on some of my music stuff. Are you familiar with James Brown,
Yep.
Godfather of Soul?
Mm-hmm.
Wilson Pickett, another R&B singer from that area, soul from that era, soul singer Wilson Pickett. Both of those guys had this great scream that they did. It it sounded like it was tearing their head off. You know, high pitched, but it was controlled and it had vibrato on it. And I was working in the studio, sitting down there with my headphones on and playing some of the songs with that scream in it. And then, okay, how could I do that? Oh, no, no, that's not it. No, no, okay. Let me listen again. Okay. Okay. Can't get it. So I'm down there working like an hour, trying to get this scream, and I didn't know it at the time, but my wife had come home and brought her father over to visit, like a Saturday afternoon. So this guy's like 82 years old, right? And he comes in the front door and he hears coming from the basement. He's like, "What's going on?" Oh my! He was down there. What? And my wife's like, "Ah, oh, that's just Wayne singing." That's not singing. Somebody's killing him. Cops. So that was pretty funny.
Oh man. I'm actually sort of hoping that there's now going to be like a YouTube video at least for the darkest dungeon ways to answer how to get out of your chores. Lovey would be asking for like a divorce within like I think a week. So, we do actually have a sort of related question to a lot of the things you've mentioned, more towards when you're explaining like you picking specific voices and moods and tones going forward. And that is, on behalf of Lord Iggy, just what is your take on the Ancestor's character and motivations? And do you have any info on the Ancestor we don't know? And personally, just on my behalf, because you mentioned you got the screen in chunks, I'd just like to know if you knew the big twist at the end of the game while you were voicing the character earlier on, or if that was something that was revealed to you later on.
Yeah, I kind of learned where things were going as the script came to me. So I didn't know the big reveal. I didn't know what the big ending or ultimate thing was going to be, and that is usually very important. It's very important in a particularly in a book, audiobook type of situation. You got to know what the arc of the story is, so that you can not overplay stuff too early or not underplay it. You know, you have to know what the arc is, so you could do the proper amount of drama and tension and release, and how many times you have to do it. What is the real, kicker at the end of this? You have to know that in an audiobook. Also, it's important for character development, because you don't want to find out in chapter 26 that the guy had a lisp, or he had a he had a German accent, and oh geez, I wish I'd known that, because now I've done 25 chapters and the guy sounds like he's from the Bronx. It's important to know that stuff in a book context. But the way the game will play out, these lines are triggered based on the action. So there's not an emotional or a storytelling arc that works out on a micro level like that. So I didn't have to know the ending. I just had to know, what snapshot this part of the script was, and they handle it that way. As far as background on the Ancestor and his motivations and stuff, I mentioned before that the story's loosely based on Rats in the Walls, H.P. Lovecraft, and in that story, there's a guy who inherits. He's a young guy, and he inherits, the ancestral mansion, and goes and moves in, and the atmosphere is, creepy, and there's stuff going on. It doesn't. He hears stuff going on that's really spooky and creepy, and what it must be the rats in the walls. So he digs his way down into the basement, and lo and behold, finds, much as they did in Darkest Dungeon, that uh, uh, Chris took the concept a little bit further, in that he actually incorporated the guy who uh, the mansion was inherited from. So the ancestor was, the ancestor was there. Whereas, if I remember correctly, is the ancestor, the guy who inherited the mansion from, is not a big part of the rats in the walls, beyond just some basic information that was related in the letter from the ancestor to the main guy.
The posthumous plot hook to get the main character at the location.
Right. And so basically, I just relied again on, this is how I handle Lovecraft. I mean, this is definitely Lovecraftian at its finest. It's cosmic horror at its finest. And I just took my interpretation that I got from Lovecraft books, and tried to apply it here, and maybe make the character himself a little more distinctive. Took it a little more into a characterization than I might have done with a Lovecraft story. Lovecraft doesn't rely on a lot of conversation. He doesn't have a lot of speaking lines in it. So usually the narrator is telling the story, from a third person point of view type of thing. So had a little more freedom, a little more leeway in developing a character, because it's the script is primarily first person, and that's how he came about. Other than that, the ending of it is also took its cue from another Lovecraft story, The Color Out of Space. I don't know if you've read that or if you're familiar with it, but
it's also like the thematic inspiration to a degree for Color of Madness, isn't it?
Absolutely, yep. Where there's a particularly haunted, if you will, in a sense, area in this creepy backwater New England town, and there's a guy there who is investigating it. He's doing business there. He's a surveyor or something, and he's finding this all this weird stuff that's going on. And end of the story is that the whole area was poisoned from a meteor that came down and inflicted some supernatural, extraterrestrial, horrible, weird stuff on this area. Thus, The Color Out of Space.
Yeah, that overall, yeah, that was sort of like a major thing that I've been curious about for a while. It's just like whether the intonation, everything, if the delivery was based around an intrinsic understanding of where the story was going, or if that was just built off essentially just that whole thing you mentioned earlier of just prosody and building a lot of different ways that those lines could be delivered. Because like when you get to that final segment, like I know some people in the fan base are sort of questioning whether that final conversation is the ancestor or just a representation of the ancestor to mock the shit out of you. Which I'm not sure either way, because it would be pretty Lovecraft either way to throw something that is familiar at you as a giant middle finger, or
Yep.
to be something so closely tied to you, subverted and twisted. I mean, actually, where do you stand on that? Do you think it was?
I don't know, and I would have to fall back on. Read a book recently, reread actually, because I read it many years ago when it was new, by a science fiction author by the name of Robert Silverberg, and he had this long involved story that could have been taken one of two ways at the end about what would actually occurred, and someone asked him, uh, what's the story on the ending? What's the definitive interpretation of the ending of this novel? Is it choice A or choice B? And he he came back and said, I don't know. I wasn't there. You'll have to ask the characters in the story. And he's the guy who. So I love that answer. I don't know if Chris has got a first idea on that, but I love the way it's left open to interpretation because if you can take it either way, then I think that's smart in a way, whether it was intended or not. Because if you can take it either way, uh, you stand to be able to please twice the amount of people with the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot that's left open-ended and is mysterious, and that really does fit with the whole cosmic horror thing of us not being able to fully grasp things. Like, there's enough put out that we can trace out a pretty logical timeline of events and things that occurred, but
Absolutely.
there's a lot of mysteries left in the narrative, and yeah, I can definitely appreciate that because it spawns these discussions and the wild mass guess theories and the very neat ideas that people end up eventually getting like solid evidence that this is probably true. And it's, yeah,
Yeah.
like what is it, one of my favorite ones actually is for Color of Madness, is that the entire field is a time loop, and so is the entire game. So like the new game plus is canon because of the fact that you can fight the, totally not going into more details into it than I need to, but like the true boss of the Color of Madness, you can fight it twice in a row
Right.
in theory, and it's like that whole thing of like you can't stop it, you can only delay it.
Yeah. That adds to the or reinforces the hopelessness of the whole thing. Uh, and that's the point of cosmic horror, hopelessness.
I was just gonna say, like, this is a little bit of a topic shift, but since you did mention that you had to like read up on the character to know exactly like where things are going and stuff, I was wondering how much of a book do you read before you actually start recording lines? Do you read the whole book in entirety, or?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. All of it at least once, and I try and hold it to once because you want to preserve a certain amount of spontaneity for your performance. But it's weird because the spontaneity has to be planned. You have to do a pre-read. There are people that disagree with me, but that's my opinion, and that's why. And a lot of people don't realize this when it comes to doing like an audiobook. If an audiobook is 6 hours long, by the time you get finished with it, that's the end product, right? 6 hours, start to finish. That didn't take somebody 6 hours to create. Uh, it took 6 hours to start to read it, and then you haven't recorded anything yet. And then there's research that you want to do, and that'll vary from book to book. Uh, if it's an historical thing, you want to look up the context and get your facts straight so that you're not expressing something that's like, that's not what he meant, you moron. Don't say it that way. You know, if it's a fiction thing, like I said before, you need to know the arc of the story so that you can gauge your performance properly. Um, then there's the recording of it, and when you're recording, if you're going along and you have a stumble, you trip on your tongue, well, you stop recording, you back up, you punch into where you before you made the mistake, and you start right there and keep going, punch and roll. And so, if you're recording something, if you're going to do a 2-hour session, you don't end up with 2 hours of audio. You um might end up with an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half of audio that you still have to go through and edit for time, for background noises, for misreads that you didn't catch while you were doing it. So it can take you 6 hours to get 1 hour of finished audio. Some cases, depending on how much research you have to do and how meticulous you're being and how tongue-tied you happen to be that day, it could take you 12 hours. So to do 1 hour, so it's a time-consuming process. It really is. It's you get a book that's nice short book that's an hour long. Well, that might have taken 4 full work days to finish a 1 hour segment, 1 hour book.
This just makes my whole like sympathy for Jack increase because of like all the work he puts on the interviews.
Nah, it's not that. Everybody, all of our guests and Arlyeon himself don't make many mistakes. There's not much to cut out.
Well, if you ever come across anyone who records or edits audio or does like extended audio recordings of any kind, and they say they don't make mistakes, they're either superhuman or lying. So
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't make mistakes.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. You just can't see the like totally conspicuous eyebrow wiggling and shifty looks. I'm actually gonna sort of double onto a question. So Darkest Dungeon, from what I know, has roots based on a tabletop game, Torchbearer, which it sort of ran off with its own thing. And so there's sort of like a by extension, there's sort of like this touch of tabletop there, and you yourself have dabbled in that as well. You did voice acting for an actual play podcast, I believe, for Liberty Endures?
That's right. Yep.
Could you tell us about that and how you were involved in the game itself?
Well, it was a new experience for me because I told you about my real lack of awareness of gaming in general. When it comes to tabletop, I'm pretty much totally ignorant. I mean, I'd known about Dungeons and Dragons, heard of that before. You'd have to be from another planet not to have heard of that over the years. But I didn't realize that that tabletop was like even a category of gaming. What does that mean? I'm thinking to myself, is that like what? Is that like chess and checkers and backgammon? Is that in there, or is it a more specific thing? Then I find out about the whole role playing thing and fantasy tabletop, where the story itself is driven by by chance, by rolls of the dice. To me, that's like all new stuff. So for the opportunity to get involved in something like that, that was great. The brains behind that's a guy named Travis Vengroff, Vengroff, and look him up. He's like a Renaissance man. He's involved in publishing and writing, and they've got a podcast all about Liberty, which is based on a tabletop game, and the one that I was involved in is called Liberty Vigilance, and it's a whole science fiction deal. It was really pretty cool. When I recorded my parts, I just got pretty much my lines, and the surrounding lines might have been included in some instances, but for the most part, I didn't really understand the whole story. But mine was more of a role of a
The dungeon
for lack of a
master.
better word, a narrator, a dungeon master or whatever, so it was pretty clear what my role in it was about to me. But I didn't get to hear the whole thing until after it was all done, and that was pretty fascinating too. I mean, that's a different experience. What they had done evidently was played the game and recorded the whole thing, and then hired uh, voice actors to read the experience of the live game playing, as a script, and they put in sound effects and the whole deal. So it's pretty cool. You got to check it out. Liberty uh, Vigilance, it's called. And what's the name of the game? It's based on is Liberty After, After. Is that right?
I believe I have a link to it somewhere. I think it was Liberty After, because it was like Liberty Endures, Liberty. They were all Liberty something.
Yeah. But to answer your question, it's a pretty cool experience. Really, my first experience with tabletop gaming. I never played Dungeons and Dragons or any of that stuff. No, never had been exposed to it, and to see it once again in its full blown in all its glory, or after the project was done, it's like wow, this stuff is cool. I had no idea.
So, actually, related to this, then, I've noticed you mentioned like an interest in spectating and sort of dabbling in gaming since you've seen its evolution. Is like the tabletop role playing game a domain you intend on venturing further into, either as a player or a game master, given you would have the super dramatic, voice to, you know, I guess tell everyone how doomed they are, be the
Yeah.
grim arbiter of all their fates?
Well, yeah, I mean, if that opportunity comes up, I certainly would entertain it because uh, it's a really interesting aspect, really interesting niche of the voice industry that I didn't even know existed before Darkest Dungeon. So yeah, the thing I'd be most concerned about would be to make sure it's good casting, and that I can, with whatever my particular style is or skill set, that I can actually do the role justice. I've turned down things before because I didn't think I would be able to um, uh, do what was called for to the level of quality that I would insist upon myself. So it's all about casting. If the casting is right, shit, yeah, I jump on it.
All right. So just I suppose finishing this part off on casting and professionalism, do you have any tips, tricks, or hobbies you use to wind down from work-related stress, and just anything in particular to take care of your throat so you don't strain or damage it?
Well, in terms of the taking care of your throat thing, there's all sorts of common sense stuff. Don't smoke. Take care of your health that way. Uh, if you're finding yourself in a position where you're going to have to do long sessions, you know, um, don't do it hungover with 2 hours sleep. You know, uh, be prepared to go in there and work and do your work, and be prepared to be able to stand it. Um, and when using your voice, if it hurts, don't do it. If you're doing some kind of particular character or something, and it's like you want to get some kind of scratchy, monstrous sound or something, and you're going for that. If you're doing it in a way that gives you a sore throat, then knock that off. It's it's your body trying to tell you something. So listen to it. Um, in terms of my own personal, winding down or whatever, um, I play my drums, I play my guitar, I do, recording for my own entertainment, or I just goof off and watch TV or something, read, do something that's not what I do for work. Uh, that way, if you get away from it, you can come back to it, with fresh ears and a fresh attitude, and you're not like stuck in this morass of I do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I want to kill myself. Take some time off. If your body tells you need time off, rest, do it. Your head tells you to rest, do it. One thing that I'm still guilty of is being a little overly optimistic about what I can accomplish and committing to too much.
Same,
Um,
fam. Same.
you just taking on too much. I'm starting to learn, how to postpone things. With a job that's in this type of thing, if you're a musician or a voice person or whatever, or I imagine it's the same is true for artists. If they're taking commissions, you never know. When your next meal is coming from. It's it's very hand to mouth. And if you start to get in a situation where you're getting a lot of offers, it's yes, yeah, oh yeah, of course, yes, 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 and then everything ends up being late, and you're in trouble. So trying trying to learn how to be
Balance all
sensible
that.
about that too. So
Yeah, that's actually a lot of really wholesome advice. Some of which I should probably be taking. But we've talked a lot about Darkest Dungeon so far, but you have a prolific amount of audiobook readings to your name, varying from Lovecraft and Poe to horror at large, as you mentioned, as well as even like instructional books. Human Leather Duster, I love that that's his fucking Reddit name, wants to know how you got into the Cthulhu-esque scene.
well, I grew up on science fiction movies, horror movies. Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman, and the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and dinosaur movies, and I was kind of precocious in a way. My dad was a big reader and a big science fiction fan, so we had like 100 science fiction books laying around the house at any given time. So I took to reading them and read all the '50s pulp science fiction stuff, and it's just really into the sci-fi monster horror thing. Like a lot of preteen and teen boys are, and I never grew out of it. I discovered H.P. Lovecraft. I think I must have been mm, about 10 or 11, so 1965. Saw a story called Cool Air, creepy as hell, and it just stayed with me. So I sought him out, and I was actually an H.P. Lovecraft aficionado long before I think he started getting the level of attention he's got now. I'm not really an expert on him, his life, his inner workings, or anything like that, but just in terms of knowledge of his material, I've read it all a million times and still think it's great. So that's how I got into H.P. Lovecraft. Just discovered him early and found no one like him. So just continued to read him, and I don't know. That's it, really.
And the rest is history. Actually, dialing back a little bit, you mentioned the voices that are bad for your throat and stuff and health and everything. I also want to mention I actually saw one voice actor who he did a voice by like pressing on his throat, and it was, I mean, it was an interesting voice. I didn't know anything about voice acting, so I was like, maybe I should try that. And yeah, I tried it. I said like 2 words maybe, and my throat hurt for like the rest of the day.
Yeah, no, don't do that. I mean, you could probably get a really cool effect with a hangman's noose too, but I would advise against trying that. Basically, that's the idea. If it hurts, don't do it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you, if you have to learn by experience, you'll learn it pretty quick.
That's right.
It really sounds like common sense too. It's like we shouldn't do stuff that hurts, like sticking our stoves in the oven, and then you're like, but it looks so cool.
Well, yeah. So, like you said, some people only learn from experience. I heard one saying, some people just have to piss on the electric fence for themselves.
I love that that's actually an expression. Goddamn.
So this next one is from Detestable Creature. Wants to know, what is your favorite Lovecraft story?
And I'd just like to know what your favorite Poe tale is.
Lovecraft. There's a couple. Lovecraft. One is, well, I mentioned it a few minutes ago, Cool Air. You familiar with that one at all?
I'm not actually.
Okay, it's really cool. It's about this guy who moves into a boarding house in Brooklyn, in New York, in the Red Hook section, I think, as a matter of fact. And he's getting to know all his neighbors, other people that live in the building in the boarding house. And there's an eccentric old man, professorial doctor type, who lives upstairs from him that he gets to know, and has conversations with him once in a while. And long story made longer, uh, he he notices that there's some kind of leak happening in his ceiling from the apartment above where this guy lives. It's you know coming down to the ceiling. There's water dripping. So he goes upstairs to find out what it's all about. And there's this weird chemical smell and what's going on. So he goes on, and over the course of the story, discovers what the source of it is. This guy is like some kind of mad scientist type, and this is in the days before air conditioning, early 20s. And this guy had rigged up all sorts of, cooling devices and ammonia driven, unidentified machines that cool things off and keep his body cool. And his machines break down one day. And so he goes upstairs to see what all the trouble is about and what all the dripping is about. And he finds the guy in the bathtub with 30 pounds of ice cubes, and he's trying to keep himself cool. And the end of the story is that the guy died like 20 years ago, but he's, through whatever mysterious processes, has kept his body animate as long as he can keep it cool. Keep the meat from going bad. And so this guy, narrator of the story, says that some people find horror only in the dead of night or in the deep woods or in spooky areas like that, but I can find horror in the bright light of noon if I ever get a breath of cool air, because it reminds him of that. Really creepy story. I didn't do it justice in the summary. Really cool story. Now I like H.P. Lovecraft. I like Dagon, real short story. Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
There's one I'm planning on recording not too long from now. Case of Charles Dexter Ward.
Oh.
Which it's one of his longer ones, and I won't give away the story here, but that's really good. It's based on a typical H.P. Lovecraft trope. Poe. I'd have to say The Raven, just based on it's really a study in the construction of a poem. I mean, he had every word, every letter, every sentence planned out when he wrote that, or over the course of writing it. And it's really a masterpiece of poetry. I think one of the weirdest stories of his, Hop Frog.
Not actually familiar with that one.
Okay, that's really cool. It's about in medieval times, court jester, who's a little hunchback guy, who the king and all his circle are always picking on poor Hop Frog and making a fool out of him. He gets some particularly gross, gruesome, and ingenious revenge on the whole royal court.
Wait a second. Is he like sort of the inspiration for like the Jester class in Darkest Dungeon?
Wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't put anything past Chris Barassa. He's an expert in the literature of the weird and literature of the morbid and gross, and
Huh.
yeah, so I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Yeah, because I was just thinking about that, what you're describing, and then I'm thinking of like the Jester's backstory and a lot of his flavor text. I'm just like, oh, that's such a clever reference. So, what drew you to the horror genre? Since you seem to have such a presence there. Like you've mentioned, you've already sort of mentioned like what drew you to Lovecraft, but and I sort of touched on this, but is there like something that drew you to horror specifically and sort of having such a presence there in the audiobook realm?
Well, you know, Frankenstein, Dracula, all those monsters. Those monster movies used to be on TV on a pretty regular rotation. So, and some of them were particularly the '50s sci-fi stuff, the flying saucers and those type of stories. Some of them were campy and schlocky, and they had their own charm and own attraction. But some of them were just, you know, uh, classics of movie making for the time. Frankenstein, uh, holy cow! So some of the sets are just, and particularly in black and white, they just grab you with the whole atmosphere. It was just that was some scary stuff, man. And the more of it I watched, the more of it I liked. I didn't develop into having a big interest in shock horror, slasher movies or blood and gore for the sake of it. But some of the other classics of horror in the movies were just, they stand up to this day. Um, and some TV shows rose up in the genre over the course of time. Uh, you're probably familiar with, or at least have heard of, the Rod Serling's Twilight Zone. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I watched that stuff when it was in in first play. When it was on primetime network TV. There's another show that came out a little later on called The Outer Limits, which is all science fiction. Some of the episodes of that fare better than others, but just great stuff, fascinating stuff. And like I said, my dad was a science fiction fan, so to fall into it on his heels, that there's just so much science fiction in the house that there's always plenty of it to read, and it's thought provoking. I mean, to this day it is, but to be exposed to some of the ideas that you could even classify them, I think, as philosophical. Uh, some of the ideas that science fiction raises and raises the meaning of existence. What kind of value do you put on life, and how do you handle um, adversity? How do you handle fear? What do you fear? Uh, to have those kind of ideas entering into your head when you're like 8 and 10 years old, that pretty much pretty much sets your course. I think, like I said, I never grew up, I never grew out of it. I still love um, classic horror and science fiction and all that kind of stuff, and still watch those movies where I get the chance whenever they pop up. Some of them are on YouTube, some of them are on, you can get them on DVD or whatever. But and there's um, plenty of people that share that interest. So there's actually really a horror community that it overlaps a little with gaming, with games like Darkest Dungeon. But there's a thriving interest niche there all on its own.
On the subject of sort of like niches and genres, like you've already mentioned, you pursue this one because you have a lot of interest in it and a draw. Is there any other genres you have an interest in dabbling in?
Basically, it's just in terms of what I think I might be good at. I think, and that at the same time would keep my attention would be, uh, any kind of drama. Like I like watching, you know, detective shows and uh, courtroom dramas and things like that. So if that kind of stuff crops up as an opportunity in, the audiobook world is an opportunity for me to try. I think I'd like to dabble in that perhaps, but I seem to be I seem to be really strong at being a creep, strong at being creepy. And
There's plenty of room for that in hard-boiled detective novels.
you think so?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Some of those characters are total creepers.
Oh yeah, maybe like I don't know, serial killers or something.
Hmm. Just thinking of like Hannibal right now. Total
Oh yeah,
creep.
yeah.
Total creep.
I listened. Speaking of Hannibal and speaking of audiobooks, I re-listened to a really terrific performance of Silence of the Lambs um, not too long ago, uh, recorded by a voice actor by the name of Frank Muller, Muller, and I would highly recommend checking that out. Checking out anything that he does. He does all sorts of stuff, not only horror. He does, you know, drama and uh, just all sorts of stuff. And anything he does is great. He's one of those guys. I don't care what he reads. You know, he, he could read the phone book and it would be great. One of those guys.
There.
Okay. Koala Anonymous wants to know whether you'd be open for recording lines for Darkest Dungeon mods.
Um, I don't think so. I don't think I have much of an interest in that. There's mainly because the whole thing about mods are they are it's like tribute stuff, which is great. It's like fan creation for the product itself, and that's great. However, there's not a commercial aspect to it. There's intellectual property issues there, copyright issues, and so it has to remain non-commercial. And uh, I do this stuff so much, and it's such a part of my life that it's not something I would do exclusively for fun or to entertain myself. So it has to be a commercial thing for me to grab an interest in it. Maybe at some time in the future that might change if I cease doing it for a living. Um, like for example, I've pretty much retired myself in terms of doing music for a living. But I still play music all the time. I'm still totally interested in music, but I do it for my own pleasure. Um, but that's not the case with voice work at this point. So I don't think I would do. I wouldn't get involved in a non-commercial project. I don't think.
That's
Okay.
completely fair.
Understandable. All given, especially since if you did it for one, you'd probably then get swarmed with requests. So, are there any upcoming projects you'd like to talk about, be it from your literary endeavors, musical leanings? You said you're not doing that commercially, but for your own enjoyment, but that still leaves room open for just personal passion projects you want to open into, and just other odds and ends of voice acting. And are there any new projects in what is effectively untread ground for you?
Um, in terms of new projects, I've always got at least one audiobook in production. Um, there's one author that I've done. I think I've done 6 of his novels so far. 2 different series, each of which has so far 3 novels in it. The author's name is Jason Brandt, Brant, and it's kind of hard to classify the category he'd be in, whether it would be horror, yes, science fiction, yes, drama, yes. There's humorous aspects about it. He's just a great writer, and I've done 2 of his series. One is called the Hunger series. You
Wait,
can
is that
find
like Devoured and
yeah, Devoured,
yeah,
the Hunger, Ravaged.
slightly peckish?
Yeah, yeah,
I
I could
saw
eat.
that interview.
And that's really cool. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic world where there's these 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 creatures that have come into existence through whatever circumstance. Uh, they're zombies, yes. They're uh, vampires, yes. They're they're big trouble, and it's a really cool series. That's available probably iTunes and Audible if you can find it there. Yeah, I think you can get it on Amazon too. They steer you in the right place. He's got another series about this character named Asher Benson. Was a Marine, I guess, serving in Afghanistan, and he got hit in the head, received a head injury, and it enabled him somehow to read minds. And now it's how he copes with the fact that everywhere he goes, he can hear everyone's thoughts all around him. It's driving him crazy. So he drinks like 3 cases of beer a day, trying to uh, try to
Drown out
filter
the
it out.
voices.
Yeah, and over the course of time, he becomes, because of his ability, he gets drafted by the government to work on different projects, and it's a it's a I guess what you'd call a thriller. There's 3 in the series. A new one coming out called Asher's War. It's the 3rd in the series. Submitted that about a month ago, so that should be coming out probably in October. Highly recommend it. If you're into audiobooks, I think you would like this stuff. He's got a podcast too. He does Jason Brandt. He does a podcast called the Final Guys Horror Podcast. You can find that on iTunes and on his website, authorjasonbrandt.com. And what else? I do podcasts with science fiction and fantasy audio online. There, you can find them on Twitter. You can find them on their website. The guy who runs that, Jesse, is he's like he's like a scholar of science fiction and fantasy literature and audio in particular. His website, sffaudio.com, is a wealth of information on science fiction and fantasy and horror, history and crime and mysteries, and that's really cool. Did another horror book by an author named Pete Kahle, Kahle, called The Specimen. Author by the name of Bart Hopkins. Book is Dead Ends. I did a science fiction classic called Troika by an English science fiction author by the name of Alastair Reynolds. There's a horror author named Brian McNaughton, who is kind of an underground phenomenon. I think he's passed away now, but his book is really strange. It's one of the strangest books I've ever read. It's called The Throne of Bones, and that's really cool. So all that stuff, I mean, if you can keep track of me on Twitter,
Link in the description, folks.
yeah, or on my YouTube channel. I've been paying more attention to that lately. Been ramping it up, and that's growing. So that's making me think, flirting with the idea of maybe doing a Twitch stream type of show. I could figure out exactly what kind of focus to make on it. I'm definitely going to do a Patreon thing. So, if, sort of stay tuned to stay in touch with me on Twitter and or my YouTube channel, and all that stuff will be coming clear. I got some big plans for what's coming up around Halloween time. So
Yeah, actually, on that subject, so given there was like a lovely treat such as the Dota 2 announcer pack, are there any other projects where we might get to hear you as the Ancestor, or for more official Darkest Dungeon related ventures, or has this effectively marked the last things we'll be hearing for the time being?
as far as I know, I think Darkest Dungeon has reached its crescendo. However, I'm in touch with Chris Barassa and Tyler Sigmund, uh, on a regular basis. So I'm not going to let them forget about me. uh, hopefully, if they do anything in the future that I'm appropriate for, I feel confident that they would probably give me a shot at it. So.
I was actually going to ask that since they're stirring that Red Hook is currently working on a new project, were you going to be accompanying them for those future ventures? Kitty, going to the
Nothing definite at this point. I'll be checking in with them probably uh, in November, just to haunt them and make sure that they don't forget about me and forget that I'm alive. So I'll probably be having a conference with them in November, and if they have anything to announce, they'll be announcing it. But I don't know exactly what the future holds for in regard to that at this point.
All right.
Oh, this is me. Um,
Put your finger on your neck and push it real hard.
Jeez.
That'll make the line come out way better. But
Yeah.
Magic Sizing wanted to know, what is the best way to support your endeavors?
Just keep track of me. If you like audiobooks, look for my stuff on Audible and buy it. Other than that, keep track of me on Twitter. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. That would be great. Like I said, I'm ramping that up with projects that I've got upcoming. So that would be one of the best places just to find out what's going on. Also, I do have that that commitment to get some kind of firm thing going on Patreon, and if people would help me figure out what they want to see in terms of focus, there's so many different ways I could go with that. I wouldn't want to lose people's interest by doing something that I'm just interested in. But this music stuff I could do. I suppose I could do some kind of how to get involved with voice acting, type of instruction or seminars, or I could do live readings, or do chats and question and answer things, or streams just to hang out. I don't know how to actually codify it yet. So anybody has any ideas on what they'd like to see, advise me, let me know.
Yeah, if any of you guys do have ideas and post them in the comments, I'll do my best to pass them on. Otherwise, we do have Wayne's YouTube and his Twitter in the description, and you can hit either of those up to reach out to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Get in touch, follow me, stay in touch, and I will bore you to death, I guarantee it.
I mean, challenge accepted.
So once again, Cutest Girl here is coming in with a question that says, do you have any advice for someone who wants to try to get into professional voice acting?
Let's see. Yeah. Start researching it. There's tons of information online about it. And the shortest answer would be study, practice, and definitely get some training. Find out like what niche of the voice acting industry, if you will, you'd be interested in. You know, do you want to do voices for animation? Do you want to do cartoons? Do you want to do audiobooks? Uh, do you want to do games? Do you want to have your own studio and do uh, commercials or business narration? Or, you know, there's so much more to it out there, and just in terms of its content, that there's a million different niches. You know, it could mean 50 different things to 50 different people. So find out um, what part of it interests you most, and then find people to mentor you. You know, find people that you like that have that type of product online, and then listen to them. You know, try and imitate them to an extent. Figure out what they're doing. Uh, like if you were to record something, listen to it back and critique it, and what did I do differently than this person that I think is great, that did this great commercial? Uh, what did I do differently? What did he do differently than I did? And how can um, I learn to do it reflexively like that person did? There's a place, I'll tell you right now. There's a place online called Edge Studio, EDGE, Edge Studio, edgestudio.com. They have uh, they have different courses of all different levels. They have one called Investigating Voiceover, and it's like, I don't know, $100 or 150 or a couple $100, whatever. Uh, you can either go to their studio. They have a studio in New York. They have one in Connecticut. They have one in Washington D.C. And they also do online teaching and tutoring as well. So check them out. They've got a lot of stuff to offer, and basically let it grow from there. Figure out which aspect of it you're interested in, and then do your homework and do your research and find out in that niche who's buying what, and do what they're buying. You know, you can't just wing it and say, okay, I'm going to be a voice actor and uh, 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 be all over the place like I was for the first couple of years of what I was doing. Uh, you have to focus, learn what the needs and the demands of the industry are, and fill those needs and fill those demands, and it'll grow from there. On my ancient website, waynejune.com, I think Fred Flintstone built it for me. Um, I have a page called Where to Start. So go to my website, and once you get through laughing at the ancient technology, the information on there is pretty current. So waynejune.com and Where to Start. And sum it up: study, practice, and get training. Don't expect to um, make up what it's all about in your head. Get training, and it's a business like anything else. If you wanted to start a restaurant, you'd pretty much have to learn how to cook. So that's what this is about too. If you wanted to be a voice actor, find your focus and learn what's going on in the industry, and press your hand on your neck really hard whenever you talk.
You're just never going to live that down.
If it doesn't hurt, don't do it.
Only do it if it ruins your throat.
What is it? Don't do school, drink your drugs, and do milk?
I'm telling you though, there's some mutant people out there who can just do that and it doesn't bother them at all.
Yeah, I can like move my Adam's apple so it's off like to a like almost 90-degree angle. It doesn't mean I should do it. Also, I'm pretty sure that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, it's horrifying to hear, actually.
Yeah, it hurts like the dickens, and it just sort of comes loose sometimes, and it hurts a lot.
Oh man,
that's what I get for a rough and tumble life.
You're on your way to success with that.
Yeah, I can just press my finger really hard and budge it talk differently, be in agony.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience? Final words or memes? More life-changing advice for Shrimp.
I think I've pretty much covered everything in the universe. But just to reiterate, if you have interest in the industry in general, or me in particular, or Darkest Dungeon, or audiobooks, or whatever, follow me. Get in touch with me. I don't bite hard, and I'd be happy to hear from you. Maybe you can help me do this Patreon thing and figure out what would be a cool thing to put on that, because I'm gonna do it. It's just I don't know what I'm gonna do yet.
So yeah, to the folks currently watching, first off, you can check out Wayne June on YouTube, as he mentioned, for news and other odds and ends. There's both his Twitter account, which is Wayne_June. Plus, there's a spiffy website that we mentioned, which we have links to in the YouTube descriptions, and we'll also be having links to a few of the other things that he mentioned earlier, provided he passes me those links after the interview. I'd also just like to toss out a few quick shout-outs to some of the contributors who provided questions that were either rolled into other people's questions or which were more or less covered by someone earlier. So thank you to Marinator, Tink_the_bus, a username I'm not going to say, but sums up as a viewer who really, really likes horses a lot.
Oh no.
Linnaeus Lover, Rocket 3, Eon Brick, Lawful Spoon, and JMac18. Thanks to all of you folks and the ones who were mentioned, and just everyone who showed interest in this project. But, most of all, thank you, Wayne, for showing up on the show. I know we're small, and it's actually really flattering that you took the time to sit down with us and just hash things out.
I appreciate the invitation. I only time I get a chance to really talk, other than something that I'm reading, is when I'm torturing my wife. So to be able to torture somebody else is a great opportunity for me. So thank you guys.
Also, secondary thing for people, in case you would like to join our Discord, there is going to be a link to it both in the description as well as just at the top of the YouTube bar, which is the Crit Hit Cauldron, a channel devoted to fans of the indie gaming community as well as tabletop gaming. It's a lovely, friendly place for those of you who are looking for like-minded people who are interested in that, I guess, subgenre of gaming, and I guess it would be also a very good way to poke at Wayne if you have suggestions for that Patreon.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Other than that, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give your comments. Again, Wayne really needs suggestions for that Patreon, and you know what? I probably need suggestions for a Patreon or coffee too, because I am way less popular than you, man. So yeah, if any of you guys have suggestions in either case, let me know. If you have suggestions for someone you would like us to talk to who is either indie or tabletop related, I'm happy to hear it and try and touch base. I will generally make a good effort to tackle both the games to get a good idea of what the hell I'm talking about, and just to research the people to go and hash things out with them, and yeah. Oh yeah, and I guess feel free to hit the dislike button if you hate me talking, or the like button if otherwise. And if you want to see more developer interviews, slices of indie gameplay to know what the heck you'd be buying, podcasts, and there is the whole tabletop project we're working on, feel free to hit that subscribe button and the bell to actually get alerts when we do stuff, because YouTube is silly and doesn't wrap those both into the same thing. Did I forget anything, Shrimp?
Nope.
Oh, wait, if you're a hobo, please sign up to Shrimp's totally legitimate white van to deliver you food and not harvest your organs.
Yes.
He won't hurt you, honest.
Thank you. Anyways, this has been Arlyeon, and I will catch you folks next time.